Nobody in Millhaven had entered the Ashwick house in 31 years. Not since the night old Gerald Voss was found at the bottom of the cellar stairs, his neck twisted at an angle that the coroner called mechanically impossible for a fall. The house had sat empty ever since, windows boarded, gate rusted shut, the garden swallowed by dark weeds that seemed to grow thicker every season, as if the earth itself were trying to bury the place. Daniel Marsh drove past it every day on his way to the hardware store where he worked. He had lived in Millhaven his whole life and had learned, as every local child learned, to keep his eyes forward when passing that stretch of Ashwick Lane. You did not look at the house. You did not slow down. You certainly did not stop. So it was with a particular sense of dread that Daniel sat across from Mr. Elias Crown, the elderly solicitor, and listened to the man explain that Gerald Voss had been Daniel's great-uncle, a fact nobody in his family had ever mentioned, and that Daniel was now the sole heir to the Ashwick Lane property. "You can sell it, of course," Mr. Crown said, shuffling papers without meeting Daniel's eyes. "Though I should warn you, 3 separate estate agents have tried. Each time, the sale falls through. Buyers back out. One man, Mr. Deal, a very sensible fellow, a developer from the city, he walked through the property and came out looking as though he'd aged 10 years. Wouldn't say why. Handed back the keys and drove away." Mr. Crown finally looked up. "I mention this only so you are not surprised." Daniel drove to Ashwick Lane that same evening. He told himself he only wanted to look. He stood at the rusted gate for a long time, studying the house in the dying October light. It was a large Victorian structure, 3 stories, with a turret room at the northeast corner whose narrow window caught the sunset at an angle that made it appear, briefly, to glow a deep and livid red. The boards over the ground floor windows had begun to rot. The front door, painted black, though the paint had blistered and peeled, stood slightly ajar. Daniel pushed the gate open.
He had not planned to go inside. He had not planned to stay past dark. He had certainly not planned to fall asleep in the dust-covered armchair in what had once been the sitting room, his flashlight rolling off the armrest and going out sometime after midnight. He woke to the sound of footsteps on the floor above. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Not the creak of old timber settling. Daniel had grown up in an old house. He knew the difference. These were footsteps, heel and toe, moving from one end of the upper hallway to the other, pausing, then returning, back and forth. Back and forth. Daniel sat very still, his heart slamming against his ribs, and did not breathe for what felt like a very long time. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in from every direction. The flashlight was dead. The sitting room was black as the inside of a sealed box. Daniel fumbled for his phone, turned on the torch, swept the beam around the room. Dust motes drifted. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling in long gray curtains. The wallpaper, once a deep burgundy floral pattern, had peeled away in strips to reveal the gray plaster beneath, which was covered, Daniel noticed for the first time, in handwriting. He crossed to the nearest wall and held his phone close. The writing was cramped, frantic, done in something that had once been dark but had faded to the color of rust. The same sentence, written over and over and over in every direction, filling every inch of exposed plaster from skirting board to cornice. He watches from the stairs. Daniel turned around. The door to the hallway was open. He had closed it when he came in. He was certain of that. He stood in the yellow circle of his phone's light and stared at the open doorway and the darkness beyond it, and from somewhere in that darkness came a sound that was not footsteps and was not the house settling. It was a sound like a very slow, very patient exhale. The breath of something that had been holding itself still for a very long time, and had only now, upon being watched, decided to let go. Daniel left the house at a run. He should have sold it. He knew he should have sold it. Instead, he went back the next morning with a crowbar, work gloves, and a ridiculous stubborn pride he could not adequately explain. He told himself it was practical. The property was worth something, he needed the money, he would simply air the place out and fix it up and sell it for what he could get. He told himself this while prying boards off windows and not thinking about the handwriting on the walls. Margaret Holt lived in the cottage directly opposite the Ashwick gate. She was 83 years old, tiny and sharp-eyed, and she had been watching Daniel work for 20 minutes before she crossed the road and addressed him. "You're the nephew," she said. It was not a question. "Great-nephew," said Daniel. "Same thing. Gerald used to talk about your mother. He liked her." She studied the house with an expression that Daniel could only describe as deeply tired. "I was 15 the night he died. I was the one who called the constable. I heard him screaming. Daniel lowered the crowbar. The report said he fell. He fell because something drove him down those stairs. Margaret said it plainly, the way you say something you have long stopped trying to make people believe. I heard him. He was screaming that it was behind him. That it had been behind him for days and he couldn't get it to stop. She paused. He'd been hearing the footsteps, you see. In the beginning he thought it was the house. Then he started finding marks on the walls. Then he stopped sleeping. Then, she gestured toward the house, a small, final gesture. What is it? Daniel asked. He heard the fear in his own voice and didn't bother trying to hide it. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Gerald's father built this house in 1889. There was something here before it, a structure nobody has records of, something the locals burned down and didn't speak about after. Gerald's father built right over the foundations. He thought that was clever. She turned to go back across the road. Whatever was here before is still here. It doesn't leave. It just waits for someone to come back inside and remind it that it's not alone. She paused at her gate. Lock the cellar door from the outside. Whatever you do, do not open the cellar door. He locked the cellar door. He hammered a length of board across it for good measure. He worked through the afternoon tearing out rotten floorboards and broken plaster, and by evening the ground floor at least had light in it again, which helped. Light helped. He kept all the lights on. He found the second message at 6 o'clock, scratched into the underside of a floorboard he had lifted near the hearth. Not written in the frenzy of the plaster walls. This was carved carefully, deliberately, with something sharp. Gerald's handwriting, he suspected, though he had nothing to compare it to. It does not want the house. It wants the person in the house. It will not stop until you are afraid enough. Do not let it know you are afraid. Daniel read it 3 times. Then he put the board down and sat in the middle of the floor for a while. At 7:30, the footsteps began again. Directly above him, the same measured pace, heel and toe, end to end and back again. Daniel did not move. He sat in the room with all the lights on and breathed slowly and thought about what Gerald had written. Do not let it know you are afraid. The footsteps descended the stairs. He heard each step, the creak of old wood under deliberate weight. Down the staircase, one step at a time, until they reached the ground floor hallway. And then they stopped, and in the silence that followed Daniel could hear, very faintly, from the direction of the cellar, the sound of something rhythmically striking the door from the other side. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Not a frantic hammering. Not the random noise of pipes or settling timber. A knock. The patient knock of something waiting to be let in. Daniel stood up, walked into the hallway, and stood directly in front of the cellar door. The knocking continued, steady as a metronome. No, he said, aloud, to the empty hallway. The knocking stopped. The temperature in the hallway dropped so sharply that Daniel's breath fogged in front of him. From somewhere very close, impossibly close, right beside his left ear, came the exhale again. The slow, patient release of held breath. He turned his head. There was nothing there. But the cold was so intense that his eyes watered. And for just a moment, in the fog of his own breath in the still air, he thought he could see the outline of a shape. Tall. Still. Right beside him. Watching. He walked to the front door. He opened it. He stood in the doorway and breathed the cold outside air and did not run, and did not scream, and after some minutes the temperature behind him began, very slowly, to return to normal.
Margaret came over that evening without being asked, as though she had been watching and waiting for him to reach a certain point. She brought tea in a thermos and sat in the least dusty chair and listened while Daniel told her what had happened. She nodded at the parts about the cold and the outline of the shape as though confirming something she already knew. My grandmother told me what the old structure was, she said at last. Before the house. Before the Voss family came. She cradled her tea. It was a place of, she paused, choosing the word carefully, containment. Not a church. Not a prison. Something older than either. Something was brought here, a long time ago, from elsewhere. Something that could not be destroyed. So it was contained. Sealed. And then people forgot, the way people do, and Gerald's father built right over the seal, and the seal broke, Daniel said. Or was broken. She looked at him steadily. It wasn't an accident that Gerald inherited from his father. These things have a way of passing down. Of choosing. It latches onto whoever owns the place. It studies them. It learns what frightens them. And then it uses that knowledge, because fear is what it feeds on. She set down her tea. You're not terrified, I notice. Or you are, but you're not giving into it. That's unusual. I'm terrified, Daniel said honestly. I just don't know how to show it differently. Margaret almost smiled. That might be what saves you. That night, Daniel slept in the armchair again. He slept with every light on and the front door open and Margaret's number on his phone's lock screen. He slept because if he showed it that he was too afraid to sleep, it would know. The footsteps came at midnight. Down the stairs, across the hallway, to the sitting room doorway. And then nothing. Silence. The cold bleeding in under the door. Daniel kept his breathing slow and even. In the doorway, he could feel it. The way you can feel someone standing in a dark room even when you cannot see them. Something stood and watched him. He did not open his eyes. He kept his breathing steady and his hands loose at his sides, and he did not give it what it wanted. Sometime before dawn, the cold retreated. He woke to ordinary morning light and the sound of birds. He found the original seal on the 9th day. He had been working through the cellar, carefully, with the door propped open and Margaret sitting at the top of the stairs where she could see him, pulling up the flagstones one by one. The knocking had started as soon as he descended, but it was coming from somewhere beneath him now, not from the door, which told him he was close. Under the 4th flagstone from the north wall, he found the carved stone. It was perhaps 3 feet across, circular, engraved with symbols he did not recognize, or almost did not recognize, because one of them, he realized slowly, matched the symbol that appeared, tiny and precise, in the corner of every single piece of handwriting Gerald had left on the plaster walls upstairs. Gerald had known. Gerald had found it, probably in the final days, when it was already too late. The stone was cracked. A clean fracture across the center, from edge to edge. The crack was recent, relatively speaking, perhaps 100 years old. The age of the house. Daniel sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long time. Can it be repaired? He called up to Margaret. A pause. Then, my grandmother said there was a way. She said you'd need to close it with something of your own. Willingly given. Not blood, that's an old story. Something else. Another pause. She said you'd know what it was when the time came, because the house would show you. The cellar went cold. The kind of cold that lived in the bones. And in that cold, Daniel felt something shift in the quality of the air around him. Not threatening, for the first time, but something almost like attention. Something paying attention in a different way. As though it were waiting for a different thing now. He understood, then, what was asked. He reached into his jacket and took out the only photograph he had of his mother, who had died when he was 7, which he had carried with him every day since. He looked at it for a long moment in the cellar's cold light. Then he placed it face down in the crack in the stone. The cold stopped. Not gradually. Not the slow retreat of the previous nights. It stopped, completely, like a switch thrown, and in the sudden warmth Daniel heard, from everywhere around him and from very far beneath him simultaneously, a long, low sound that could have been the house settling, could have been the earth, could have been something releasing a breath it had held for longer than any human accounting. Then silence. Ordinary silence. He sat in the cellar until Margaret called his name from the top of the stairs, her voice cautious and wondering, and he answered her. He was all right. He was coming up. He sold the house in the spring. The sale went through without complications. The buyer, a young couple with plans to restore it, walked through twice and reported nothing unusual. The woman said she loved the light in the east-facing rooms. Daniel kept in touch with Margaret until she passed away 2 years later, quietly, in her cottage across the road. He attended the small funeral. He stood at the graveside and thought about things that cannot be destroyed, only contained, and about what it means to give something of yourself to hold a thing in place. He drove past Ashwick Lane one last time on his way out of Millhaven. The young couple had taken the boards off the windows and planted roses along the front wall. The house looked, in the afternoon light, like any other old house on any other lane. Solid. Quiet. Unremarkable.